Hey, look, have you ever put out your creative works? You were excited about it. You were hyped. You were excited to get it out into the world. And then all of a sudden, the excitement left. It fell flat. You didn't get the response you thought you were going to get. The engagement was minimal. You felt like people just didn't get it. Look, I've been there before. I put my heart and soul into stuff. And I'm like, wait a minute. Why didn't it get the reaction that I thought it was going to get? But there's a reason for this. And I want to unpack four reasons why us as creators, why we struggle to build an audience and get meaningful and recurrent support. But first, before we get into this, let's define what connection and potential support means. It means that your creative works resonates with people and causes them to take actions. What are some examples of this? They sign up for on your email list and attend an event that you're curating. You receive sales from album products like a vinyl. You get more open rates on your email list. You get more shares on social media. People actually engaging with the content. Your art must resonate with the supporter's consciousness and needs. But we got to get into three reasons why us as creators, why we struggle to connect with our potential supporters. So number one, there's a self-centered focus. It's all about me. The all about me trap. That's what I like to call it. This happens when a creator makes their creative work only about themselves, their thoughts, experiences, struggles, without thinking of the audience's perspective. Never assume just because you love your work, others automatically will. While your perspective in creating the works is valid and important, if you're aiming to engage others and ultimately acquire sales, the art created must allow those you're aiming to reach to see themselves in it, validated in it, and solve a pain point that's relevant to them. I can't tell you how many times I've worked with creatives, worked alongside of creatives, that when we began to create something, the entire focus was about their needs, their wants, their desires, how they were being perceived in the music. I'm a hip hop artist and producer here in Chicago, so I'm going to use music as a conversation piece here. And while that is understandable, I mean, we are within ourselves, right? So we see ourselves before anybody else does. So our needs, our wants are natural. It's not a unnatural thing to think about self. But when you think about how it connects to someone else, you have to get outside of yourself. So when the project or the work actually comes out and then the engagement is not as intense or it is not as expected as one might think, you have to look back and think about the language. You have to think about the presentation. You have to think about how the conversation is being created around the creative work itself. Is it just about you? Is it all about you? Does it include anyone else's needs, anyone else's thoughts, anyone else's desires? Does it speak to a larger theme? These things are important because if you don't speak to that, then chances are you might fall flat because it's self-centered, it's internal, it's all about oneself, the person is creating. And again, art is personal, but connection only happens when people see themselves reflected in it. Your work should invite people into a larger connection point rather than just showcasing you and making their entire creative experience only about yourself. So, again, we want to make sure that our creative work reflects the people and the principles and the ideas of them as well. Um, One person who is very great at this is Kendrick Lamar. A prime example is "To Pimp a Butterfly," one of my favorite albums that have ever came out, period, but just in hip hop music. Another example of this, Marvin Gaye's "What's Going On," my favorite album of all time. Just to use that album for an example, it specifically spoke to the pain points of the people at that time. Fresh out of the Vietnam War, he started to speak about the needs of the people, poverty, climate change, all of these different relevant elements that people were feeling at that particular time, whether politically, economically, it spoke to the culture. And that's why that album is considered one of the greatest albums of all time and is extremely revered because people saw themselves in it. And when you create work with that perspective, chances are you're going to connect in a much more deeper way than you would ever expect. So, what is the danger of staying self centered in your artistic practice? People won't feel connected, it'll be limited engagement. Your art becomes inaccessible. You get it, but nobody else does. You alienate your potential audience instead of inviting them in to be a part of something larger than themselves. And they get to see themselves within that creative practice. So, again, that's the danger. It's separation. It's you standing alone uh, in a egocentric way, and people don't get to see themselves connected to the art. So, what does that mean? That means that they can't see themselves in it. They can't connect. They can't grow. They can't evolve in it. And then you start to lose, you start to lose interest, the interest of people relevant to that creative work. So that's number one. Number two, we kind of alluded to this earlier, but I want to expand on this a little bit more. Your creative work does not solve a problem. The best creative works tap into a deeper societal need. It helps people navigate their own struggles, and supporters utilize your creative works as a way of supreme entertainment, enjoyment, or healing. So again, people support and buy art that benefits them and solves their problems. So an example would be, if you're an artist, you're telling a story that speaks to a much larger theme than themselves. Instead of just making good songs, the biggest and greatest albums of all times reflect the times. I stand on that. When you reflect the attitudes and the dispositions of people in your music, you're going to connect and go a lot further than you can ever imagine. So when you don't have a creative work that solves a problem for the potential supporter, again, people don't engage the art. They just don't engage it. You struggle to get people to buy into the vision of your creative practice. Supporters feel no reason to stick around and will eventually go elsewhere where they feel connected, involved, and a part of the artist's journey. So, as a creative, we do create works from ourselves. It's internal, it comes from our experiences and what we've been through. But when we put it out to the public, it now becomes public work. It now becomes something that can be critiqued, something that can be evaluated, something that can be received. And once it gets into the hands of the public, it should add value to the culture. It should elevate the culture. It should allow for the culture to grow and evolve from one place to another without feeling as if it's detracting from that said person or detracting from the culture in and of itself. It should cause conversation. But when it's all about you and it's focused on you and it doesn't solve a larger problem that the supporter has, it doesn't have any weight and it has no sustainability. And then number three, the work is ego driven and not service driven. Ego driven creators focus on their own success and their own perceived greatness. Look at me. Look at how great I am. Service driven creators focus on reflecting the times, serving their supporters. They think in terms such as, how can I help my audience with my creative works? People are drawn to creators who make them feel seen, heard, and valued, and not prioritizing their own success. They focus on community building. Your work has to fit into a larger narrative outside of you. When your art connects to the history, futurism, current culture, and a larger social theme, it's more powerful and connects much more deeply. And when you think about your creative practice, you want to connect on a soul level. You want it to resonate with people to the point where they almost feel enlightened by your creative work. And that is what creates long-standing supporters. That's what gets people lining up to purchase the art, to show up to the event, to download the song, to buy the fashion piece. Because again, it speaks to a larger feeling internally that they're trying to solve within themselves. And then they build community alongside of that. They feel connected to you because you connect at that same point that you're in service with. So when you have an ego-driven mindset in your creative practice, you may come off as unapproachable. Supporters will, again, eventually feel disconnected. You end up chasing validation instead of community building, and it allows others to connect with you through your art, ultimately seeing the problem solved through your creative works. The work feels disconnected from society and has no lasting impact. I just want to touch on the chasing of validation. To speak to ego-driven work instead of service-driven work, this is why it's important to have a healthy understanding of who you are as a person. Because if you understand who you are, you understand how you're made up, and you understand how your creative works serve society and serve someone, then you tend to eradicate those ego-driven practices or that ego-driven mindset. Because at the end of the day, your focus is not on anything other than the individual that you're serving, the group that you're serving, the target people that you're serving. Because without that, you're going to revert to this internal viewpoint of the world that's only relevant to you. And granted, again, it's important, but we live in a world that's just not of ourselves. We live in a larger societal context that everybody has different life experiences. They come from different places, different backgrounds. So they see the world differently than ourselves. And it's important to invite their viewpoints into the conversation of our art and into our practice. Now, that doesn't mean to not be authentic. You should be authentic to who you are. It's just a consciousness of thinking about others in that practice and not just thinking of self. So when you think about connecting to supporters, these particular points may be a reason why you're struggling to connect and to have a long-lasting impact and to have people actually follow into the movement of your creative practice and what you do as a creative. Again, the focus is self-centered. Your creative works don't solve a larger problem. They're problems. And the work is ego-driven and not service-driven. So those are the points as to why that your creative works may not connect with supporters. So for next week, we'll focus on 4 ways to connect with potential supporters to increase having active supporters who care about your creative works and engage with them, making sure that they take action and further your creative practice and developing long-lasting connections with supporters. That is the goal. We want connection. We want long-lasting support. We want support that goes beyond the here and now. And that takes you understanding how your work serves others, how it fits into a larger theme that people care about and solves their problems as the end result. So next week, meet me here. We'll talk through it and we'll get you the answers you're looking for. Again, I'm Neak. Be blessed. Peace.